Hello and welcome to Lifecycle Management 101. My name is Chris. I'm joined by Alyssa, and we are solutions engineers here at Okta. We also have the pleasure of John from TEGNA joining us, and he's going to talk about how his company has implemented lifecycle management. So, a couple quick things. Keep in mind, this is Lifecycle Management 101. So, entry level. If you have like more advanced use cases, want to go a little bit deeper into like workflows or high level HRs and master scenarios, keep in mind we have sessions for you. But today, the agenda, what we're going to cover is the stages of lifecycle management and the complexities of it. I'm going to run through a couple slides of that for you. And then Alyssa's going to do a demo of lifecycle management for you. And then John's going to cover how TEGNA has rolled out lifecycle management. And then we're going to do a quick question and answer between the three of us here. So let's get started. Lifecycle management, as defined by Okta, we are covering the employees as they join the company, change roles, and the deactivation of those users. Lifecycle management has a ton of challenges today, whether it's the explosion of users from employees, contractors, partners, or customers. With that, they have all their devices too, whether it's corporately owned or a bring your own device scenario. We also have applications with their interconnected life cycles. So all those different applications and different portals, we have to maintain all those too, right? And then you have things like shadow IT, or maybe like a business app owner, and IT may not have control or access to help automate those applications. Then you could also have a legacy identity access management solution, and you need to account for that too, because maybe it can't handle the cloud. So where does that lead us? So at Okta, we like to define these challenges and break it down in a couple lifecycle stages. So we have the joiners, movers, and leavers within an organization. And we're going to walk through all these here. So a joiner is when someone is hired into the company. And there could be multiple different ways that those users join. So we could have an HR system that we integrate into. We could have a directory like Active Directory or LDAP. We could have self-service registration, maybe a social sign-in as well, right? And help enable those users to get enrolled on their own. Now, the main part out of joining and taking care of that life cycle is that automatic assignment of birthright access. So those users on day one, they have access to the right applications at the right time. That way they're not sitting around twiddling their thumbs, waiting at their desk for someone to get them going, right? And then the next part is that we have those movers. So we're not just static anymore, right? People change roles, they get promoted, maybe they got married, they got a name change. We need to handle these different scenarios, even like a leave of absence. We have to have rules and logic to help capture any of these changes and automate it for us so we can scale the business. And then lastly, and the most important, we have those leavers. So when someone leaves the company, we need to figure out how do we automatically, immediately take care of removing their access to all their systems and also scheduling it, right? So maybe there's like a contractor that has a day out in the future that we need to remove access. We can have that automatically scheduled at the right time so they don't have lingering access. So why is this process broken today? Why is it so slow? Well, let's start at the beginning. So HR is typically the first one to know if someone's joining the company, changing roles, or leaving the company, right? And with that, IT usually follows. So maybe they're doing like a ticketing system that gets entered in of a new employee, or maybe the IT team is getting a piece of paper or a sticky note. Or maybe HR is just walking into the IT's office and saying, hey, I have a new hire starting today. Can you get them rolling out? And then IT has to figure out that reactionary mode of how do I get this user into the system as quickly and efficiently as possible? And you may have, as you see on the right side, like multiple systems that they need to tie into. And you have to do this really quickly and scale it. That way you can make this company move and have everything set up accordingly. So with that, we're going to look at some of these onboarding processes and why they don't scale. A lot of them are very error prone. They're high touch processes. And if you're only doing maybe a couple a week of new employees or offboardings, you might be able to get away with it, right? But as you have more employees, maybe more dynamic work, you're going to see that sometimes these problems kind of slip through the cracks, right? And then with that, your company will start to see that these problems can be real thorns in the side, and they may not scale well. And it doesn't help if maybe those users that need access on day one, if they can't get access for a couple days, they've lost productivity, and that could be real dollars that are lost in this process here. So with Okta, we envision in controlling the identity of these users and all the business applications for any scenario. With that, we have a single source of truth within Okta. We can tie into that Active Directory or that HR system or LDAP, and then be that central source of truth for everything in your environment. We use Universal Directory to do that. Universal Directory is a fully cloud extensible directory where we can take your users and then from there push data down into downstream systems maybe. We can put users into groups and use those groups to do role-based access. We can even take those data sets and transform them to, and we can also use APIs to act with this programmatically. So it's not just about those integrations at a high level, but here's some nice things that we can do on top of it too. We can map attributes between systems. So maybe you want to push a username from one application to another. Maybe you want to transform usernames. We can do that too. So we can substitute out a domain name, or maybe we want to put in a phone number, for example. We can do things like that. We can do attribute level mastering too. So from there, we can say, hey, let's make one application the source of all the other data sets pushing into these other applications. You can do that. And then we can also stage users ahead of time, right? So if they're starting a couple weeks, create their account, but we're not going to activate them yet until the day actually starts. So they have that application access then. And then lastly, we can do group syncing, push your groups into applications, and do password syncing too to keep everything in line and synchronized there. So we have a lot of this out of the box for you too, whether it's Microsoft's Active Directory, LDAP, any cloud HR systems or other systems of record that can act as a source of an identity. We can also interact with our users API. And if you want to create users directly into Universal Directory, we can do that too programmatically. And then we can also use our on-premise provisioning agent and just push users down into those on-prem systems too. So that way you have a fully automated life cycle. And let's see what that looks like here. So what you're seeing in this diagram is an HR system tied into Okta. Everything's automated, streamlined, and synchronized. That way your users are automatically created. We're watching for any changes, looking at the groups, assigning those users to the right application policies. And then from there, they get the right permissions and licenses automatically, right? At a high level, you can do things too, like take minute instances of changes in these new users and say, let's watch for a new employee with specific data sets and then put them into certain applications. If someone is leaving the organization and they have a contract end date, we can suspend access too, so they can be rehired at a later time with the same access. We can even look at like access policies and say, if they have a certain title, a certain location, put them in a group, and that group drives their access too for that little fine-grained access, right? So maybe if I'm in sales and I'm in Scranton, I get access to the specific Scranton sales office team solution stack, right? And then you might have instances where you have a workflow you want to set up. So maybe a request comes in for a certain application. You want a business application unit manager to assign those users application access. So that way you can go request access, that business app owner gives that access to the user, and then you're good to go there. IT can be left out as well. So I want to walk through what this looks like at a high level here. And you can tie in to multiple different HR systems. Here's a couple examples here. But what you're going to see here is like a new hire walkthrough. So as you can see, I've got HR systems on the left side, Okta in the middle. We're watching for any changes. So as HR goes in there, let's say they make a couple changes in the system, automatically goes into Okta. We can then go in and provision those users with their roles and licenses to the appropriate applications. We can even kick those users down into Active Directory. We can write attribute data there. We can send it back into Okta and help synchronize everything back and forth too. And then some of these HR systems, we can even update those attributes in there too, kind of like phone number, email address, stuff like that. As the user maybe has a job change, maybe a promotion, name change, etc., same thing. We can watch for those changes, automatically apply that user and their attribute changes accordingly. Maybe they get new apps, or maybe they have a new file permission. You can do that too, right? And then user termination. So we can, most importantly, watch for those users to get terminated and then immediately remove access. So that way they don't have any lingering access. It removes that security vulnerability, that security hole that might be lingering, right? And then that way you have everything in an easily audible fashion so you know what's going on in the environment. And then we can deactivate those users in Active Directory and also write that back to an HR system. One thing that I would like to share as a side too, about 12 years ago, I actually went through this myself. I was with a company that was trying to figure out how do we handle these like error-prone scenarios that we have of manual lifecycle management. The scripts we were using weren't working anymore. We realized we needed to have a change to help scale the business. And what we did was we actually reached out to Okta and we set up lifecycle management to implement HR as a master with our application stack. And then afterwards, we saw the true growth of the company as IT wasn't limiting what we could do in terms of rapidly onboarding new employees or taking care of those changes in their life cycle stages. So let's go into the connections to different applications. What does that look like? Well, because Okta is a best-in-breed technology, plenty of companies want to work with us. And we have easy-to-use integrations that are point and click. We have wizards and templates that get you going really, really rapidly. So you're not waiting on Okta to roll out an application. In fact, a lot of these applications you get going on your own pretty quickly. And with that, we take care of the code in the background, so you don't have to worry about any custom scripting or anything like that. A lot of this you can get going really rapidly, and we're here to take care of that for you. And our integration network is growing every day. Right now, we have over 280 applications that support lifecycle management out of the box. And you can also go into our integration network and view all the applications that have provisioning enabled and what functionalities out of the box. So the last part here is visibility and reporting. What's good of doing all this automating if we can't get any reporting? Let's walk through that. So our reports can help with audits. What we can do is we can look for like current user assignment and also check if they've been recently unassigned. We can go in there, see when their last logins were. We can also see what applications users are assigned to. If you've ever done like an audit for licensing, you know how tedious this can be, right? And with Okta, you can just easily kick out canned reports, any file that you need here, and with specific date ranges. And you can say like, hey, we know that this application access has been removed. It really speeds up that auditing process you can have. So with that, I know you're probably sick and tired of hearing me walking through these slides. I'm going to kick it over to Alyssa, and she's going to walk through a demo of lifecycle management for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, for that great introduction to Okta's Lifecycle Management. So as he mentioned, my name is Alyssa Heidema. Today I'll be taking you through a high-level overview and demo of what this looks like in practice. And in the spirit of Octane being in a documentary format this year, I've selected none other than the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company as our sample organization today. And the way that they have this configured is such that there is a profile source, in this scenario being Active Directory, but you might also imagine that this could be Okta proper or an application like an HR information system. And the user profile gets pushed from that profile source and captured by Okta. And then Okta is able to take that a step further and also automate the creation, update, and deactivation of those user profiles within downstream services like Box, for example. So let's take a look at this in the environment here. So let me introduce you to the Okta Administrative Console. This is where all things identity and access management will be administered out of from the Okta perspective. And the real backbone of the Okta platform is Universal Directory. So this is Okta's cloud-based user repository. This can act as a standalone directory, so you can add folks in natively, they can authenticate against this piece, store group memberships and attributes, things along those lines. But the piece of it that makes it universal is also this ability to tie into a number of different third-party systems. So again, in this situation, we've integrated against Active Directory. Let's now take a look at my directory integrations. So here I have my instance of Active Directory integrated against Okta, but if I were to want to iterate on that process, let's say Dunder Mifflin were to acquire another paper company with their own Active Directory instance, I might step through this process again, and we can review the architecture for this integration. So this green button here kicks off a wizard to deploy a lightweight server agent. Does not need to sit on the domain controller, just any member server of that environment. And from there, it communicates with Okta through port 443, outbound connections only. So no need to poke a bunch of holes in the firewall, no need for dedicated hardware. And you're able to synchronize those users from Active Directory to Okta. So let's take a look at the integration that I've made here. Because I did step through that wizard, I have deployed that agent, which is active and healthy. I've also configured a number of different provisioning settings here. So I've specified the OUs that I'd like to connect to Okta. And likewise, I've enabled delegated authentication to Active Directory. So this effectively allows for my users to authenticate to Okta using their existing AD credentials. I've also configured a number of settings for the integration from Active Directory to Okta. So here I'm running an import every hour to capture any potential changes in my user base. And similarly, I have allowed for Active Directory to source those Okta users, again, making AD that definitive source for the user attributes and profile. Now, Dunder Mifflin is looking to make a hire. Michael Scott, the regional manager, has been a bit overworked, so they're looking to hire him an assistant. And who better for the job than this guy, particularly with his extensive history in beet farming. So we can go ahead and populate Dwight Schrute into Active Directory, which again is the profile source in this scenario. So moving into my Active Directory environment, we'll go ahead and create Dwight Schrute. Go ahead and give him a password. Create that user account. We also know a couple additional attributes about Dwight. So for example, we know that the city he resides in is Scranton. And we also know that his job title is going to be the assistant to the regional manager. So we'll go ahead and apply those changes and save that user within Active Directory. Now moving back into Okta, as mentioned, we've scheduled an import to run every hour. Now in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and run a manual import to capture that change in Active Directory. You'll notice that one new user has been imported. That is Dwight. So we can go ahead and finish off that import and take a look again at that universal directory piece. So Dwight Schrute has been brought into Okta as an active user. We can take a look at his profile and we'll see that it is sourced by Active Directory. And we've also brought over those attributes that we've defined. So we know that his title is the assistant to the regional manager. We also know that his city is Scranton. Now you'll notice that Dwight has also been populated into some groups. He's in our Everyone group, our Domain Users group, and also our Scranton Employees group, which is managed by a group rule. So let's take a look at my group memberships as well. Here are the various group memberships that I have within my environment. Again, this is going to give you that very consolidated source of truth across your user bases, even if they originate in disparate sources. So I've got some folks who've come in from that Active Directory integration, others native to Okta, and I've also taken advantage of a number of different group rules here. So the Scranton Employees rule is what automatically populated Dwight into that Scranton Employees group. And you'll notice what I've defined here is that if a user's city equals Scranton, then automatically assign them to that Scranton employees group. And there are a number of different reasons why you might leverage these group rules, whether that's to populate AD groups to Okta or vice versa, to avoid things like PowerShell scripts, to just simplify the user management of these group memberships. And then finally, to automatically assign users to applications, as I've done here. So, what I've defined is for any member of this Scranton employees group, there are a number of different Birthright applications that they should automatically have access to. So in this scenario, Box, Slack, Google Workspace, and Zoom. And what we actually have Okta doing is automatically writing down to these applications and creating, updating, and deactivating these user profiles as soon as someone gets populated into that Scranton employees group. So let's take a look at my box configuration just to check out how that actually gets configured and automated. So for my box integration, I have configured both authentication as well as provisioning. So for authentication, I've configured a SAML integration, and you'll notice here that SAML 2.0 has been enabled because I stepped through some setup instructions to get that integrated. And we work with the vendors, in this case Box, to define these very intuitive setup instructions that show you just where to go within that service provider and even give you some dynamically generated variables that help assist with that process of integrating. So here that federated authentication has been enabled, and likewise I've configured those provisioning capabilities. So first I've established the integration to Box, that API integration, which typically is just a matter of providing some administrative credentials as I've done here. And from there, a bidirectional bridge opens up between Okta and that application. So whether I want to import folks from Box into Okta or use Okta to automate that user lifecycle process downstream to Box. So here I've specified that I'd like to allow Okta to automatically create users, update user attributes, and ultimately deactivate users. We've also got some enhanced integrations here. So I could, for example, create a personal box folder for that user when that account is provisioned. Now, because I did populate Dwight into the profile source, being Active Directory, and then that group rule automatically funneled him into a group which is assigned Box, as you'll see here, that Scranton Employees group, the expected functionality would be for Okta to write down and create Dwight that user account within Box. So let's take a look at my Box administrative account and refresh my users page here. So Dwight has been populated downstream to Box, as well as his title. You can see the assistant to the regional manager. So the same will go for any updates to that user profile and ultimately deactivation. So if I were to update a user attribute, for example, if Dwight gets a promotion, that will also be reflected within Box. So let's go ahead and do that within our profile source. So Dwight, after an arduous climb up the corporate ladder, ultimately is promoted to the regional manager. Let's go ahead and make that change within this profile source and synchronize that to Okta. So again, I'll run an import just in the interest of time here. Notice that one existing user has been updated, so Dwight's title now will reflect the regional manager as opposed to the assistant to the regional manager. Likewise, based on this configuration that I've enabled with Box, any of those updated user attributes will also sync downstream. So this can come in handy, say if a user gets married and has a last name change, or perhaps changes departments altogether, those updates will be reflected downstream. So let's take a look at Box to check out that update that was made to the user profile. Notice that Dwight's profile has indeed been updated downstream within Box. He is now reflected as the regional manager. And ultimately, he's going to leave the organization, Dunder Mifflin, going to pursue his beat passion once more, something along those lines. So we can go ahead and yank him out of Active Directory, synchronize that to Okta, and ultimately he will also be deactivated from Box just to prevent that lingering access. Go ahead and deactivate him from Active Directory. We will run one last import from Active Directory to capture that change. You'll notice that one user has been removed, so Dwight is no longer an active user within Okta. And then based on this configuration with Box, I have also enabled it to automatically deactivate users. Again, Box has some enhanced integration features. So for example, I could actually select whether I'd like to mark that account as inactive or even deleted. Here I've opted for just marking Dwight in this case as inactive. So moving back to Box, if I refresh this, you'll notice that Dwight has indeed been marked as inactive. So just great that you can trust a tool like Okta to offload these manual and often error-prone type tasks, and really give time back to IT folks to stay away from these more manual types of actions. And again, you're ensuring that you extend that day one access to those Birthright applications. And likewise, you're shrinking the attack surface by ensuring that there isn't that lingering access to applications like Box. The last thing to note here is that there's also going to be an audit trail of all of these events. So Okta's system log is going to capture each and every event that occurs within the context of your Okta environment. So whether that's a user authentication, an assessment of policy, an administrative event, an automated event like these provisioning events we've been speaking about, all of that will be captured by this system log. And for each event, there's quite a bit of structured data. So this is great for both SecOps as well as audit. You can also view this from a more map-oriented perspective, which again is quite helpful for SecOps purposes. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to John from TEGNA to share a bit about their customer journey with lifecycle management. Thank you all.
Hi, Alyssa. Thank you. So my name is John Yape. I'm the operations manager for TEGNA IT, and my goal today is just to provide you a high-level overview of how TEGNA is actually leveraging lifecycle management within our organization. TEGNA is an innovative media company that serves the greater good of our communities across platforms. TEGNA tells empowering stories, conducts impactful investigations, and delivers innovative marketing solutions. We have 64 television stations in 51 markets across the US. We reach approximately 39% of all television households nationwide. TEGNA also owns leading networks like the True Crime Network and Quest. Additionally, we help businesses reach consumers with TEGNA marketing solutions and Premion, which is our over-the-top platform. And so what you'll see in this slide is UltiPro as a master is pushing attributes from UltiPro to Okta for TEGNA. We push more than 60 attributes from UltiPro to Okta. And with these attributes, we have built more than 220 rules within Okta. This allows us to make sure employees get the right applications and access at the right time. These attributes include things like name, station, where are you working, manager, and there's a lot of other important data that allows us to really drive that automation that you heard about earlier. As an example, just a high-level example, we use an application called Kronos for timekeeping. And with that application, what we're actually doing is we're looking to see if you need access to that application based on an HR attribute. And if you do, then you get that application within Okta. But if you don't need that application, you won't see that within Okta. On this next slide, we're digging a little deeper into our HR integration. And what you see here is basically we've got that moment in time where HR is onboarding a new employee. That new employee is going to flow over, like you saw in the demo, to Okta. And then from there, we're pushing that account down to Active Directory. We still use Active Directory today in our organization. And from there are a number of applications and workflows that get triggered, things like Office 365, additional applications like Salesforce. But what we're also doing is we're taking things that we don't have at the time of hire, and we're actually flowing those attributes back to the HR system. So as an example, HR isn't necessarily going to know what your email address is at the time that you're hired. So when these workflows provision you out to Office 365, we're actually able to take that email address from Active Directory, write it back to Okta, and then provision that back to the UltiPro system. So now we have your email address should we need to contact you from the HR system. This is digging a little deeper into the slides that we were just looking at. So from an HR-driven provisioning automation, we have basically new hires again that are flowing. You see here from UltiPro to Okta. We have other applications like ServiceNow. So from a new hire perspective, you're hired on, through the HR process. We provision apps based on those attributes and the roles that we talked about. We're creating that account in Active Directory. We're writing back attributes to the HR system, and in addition to that, we're creating tickets for the onboarding process. We've got to get computers. We may need to do some application access that may be unique to your role, and we want to make sure that everyone, has that information at the time of onboarding, so we can make sure that those employees have the access they need on day one. The other items from this too, think about job changes, right? If you have somebody that leaves marketing and goes to sales, right? Those applications that they had in marketing may not be applicable to sales, and the applications they need from a sales perspective may not apply to folks in marketing. So when those attributes are updated from an HR perspective, they can be reevaluated with workflows and Okta, through those processes that take care of that lifecycle management. And probably one of the most important pieces of this is the offboarding. So we're syncing the employees, near real time. And if we have somebody leave the organization, we are able to remove that access right away. And that's critical, right? We don't want folks having access, days or weeks later when they're no longer with the organization. We want to terminate that access. We want to kill those tokens. We want to pull back licenses like Adobe. And then, there's other things you can do, and I'm sure you'll see in future sessions through Octane is workflows. One of our workflows is if you leave the organization, we evaluate your separation within Okta, and we use a workflow to actually retire your device within Intune, and that allows us to pull back that company data, and it's an end-to-end automated process.
Thanks, John. That was awesome. So, Alyssa and I had some questions for you. What advice would you give to companies that might be exploring lifecycle management?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing you want to do is define your goals. When you're thinking about your goals, think about security. Also think about how you want to improve that user experience. Think about ways you want to deliver ease of access. The next thing you want to do is really identify your problems. This is looking at what apps you have in your environment. It's looking, to determine what those capabilities are with those vendors. It's determining who those stakeholders are. Also looking forward, right? Is there anything on the horizon from an enterprise perspective for your business that may benefit from these lifecycle workflows? When you think about the HR piece, this is a partnership with HR. Make sure HR is engaged at the ground floor. You're going to be working with them through this integration, and they're going to be that partner in delivering that lifecycle management. If you can master your employees with HR, when you think about the technicals, you want to make sure that the attributes that you're bringing over from an HR perspective will meet your goals that you defined earlier. You really want to think it through, whiteboard it, document it out, identify any potential conflicts. I think one of the other very important things is use this as an opportunity to clean up access. Think about the groups, think about the users. Don't just bring that application into Okta and bring everyone over. It's a great time to have conversations with your stakeholders to ensure that that cleanup is occurring. And I think really one important thing is this is not a one and done, right? This is an ongoing process for your business, right? This is when a department or a group wants to bring a new application and make sure they know how to engage you at the beginning. You need to start these conversations with those vendors and providers to make sure that they can also meet your needs, both from an access standpoint, but also a security standpoint.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, John. And I think, especially since TEGNA does have such a robust implementation of lifecycle management, I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience will really benefit from that feedback. Sort of along those lines, what would you say the biggest benefits of automation have been at TEGNA?
Yeah, it's another great question. Our ability to provision applications out has greatly increased. I know we've been successful in deploying some applications and within a half an hour to an hour. That's dependent on the vendor, but if they've got a good practice, if they've got good lifecycle management, you really can just, as you mentioned earlier, just hop into the Okta store, grab the application, and set up that integration. I think other pieces of this were increased visibility, right? You talked about the logs. We see a lot of we see a lot of data in those logs. We move those logs out to a SIM, and we're able to build some logic on that. And that increases our security posture. I think we've got more than 6,500 employees at TEGNA, and I think one of the greatest things that this has delivered is really ease of use. We're able to look at complex business processes, or what used to be manual processes, and just drive those with no code, low code solutions. And also workflows, right? We talked about that earlier with Intune, for example. We're retiring devices programmatically if you have one enrolled in Intune. When you leave the organization, it's one less thing we have to do manually.
So I have a fun one for you here. What gets you excited about the future of lifecycle management?
I love the question. I immediately go to deeper integrations, right? This is becoming table stakes for organizations. I think both large and small companies alike really need business automation to stay competitive. It allows you to take your limited resources and really focus on your business priorities. It's going to reduce errors. You're going to more timely provision users, and probably more importantly, deprovision users when they leave the organization. So that's really important. And as you're having these conversations with your partners and vendors, you're going to have those conversations about what they can deliver from a lifecycle management standpoint. Other parts of this is, it allows us to continue that shift left, right? It empowers the employees, but also the app owners, right, to bring in an application, plug it into Okta, and then, using again tools and workflows, we're able to, allow them to provision users, or, set up approval processes. And again, I've seen, certainly more of a move to low code, no code. And again, I'll go back to the workflows that we talked about earlier, like with Intune.
Cool. With that concludes this lifecycle management session. We do have other sessions here for driving provisioning from your HR system to modernizing onboarding, offboarding, lifecycle management workflows, and then how Okta uses lifecycle management to help enhance productivity and security. So feel free to check those sessions out too. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.